Jessica, anytime you're ready.
Pardon? Good to go? Awesome. Good morning, everyone. I am going to call the Transportation Committee to order for Friday, November 18th. As permitted by the Governor's Disaster Declaration of November 10th, 2022, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee. To ensure that the meeting is as transparent as possible, CMAP posted the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance. Will provide a recording of this meeting linked on their website, and we will take all votes by roll call. I would like to remind everyone that this meeting is recorded. Committee members, please remember to state your name when making a motion or a second to help us out. And with that, Lindsay will call the roll.
Okay, good morning. We'll start with Darwin Burkhart. Kevin Carrier.
Good morning, present.
Lynette Ciavarella.
Present.
Michael Connolly or Leah. I didn't see them. Jack Cruikshank.
Here.
John Paul Deepla.
Good morning, present.
John Donovan or John Paul Kohler. Doug Ferguson.
Present.
Tony Greep. Jessica Hector Sue.
Good morning.
Doug DeLilly.
Present.
Heidi Lichtenberger for Kendall County. I know I saw Heidi. Christina, and send a message in the chat if you're having audio issues. Christina Kopkowski.
Here.
Eric Llewellyn.
Here.
Chris Hebert.
Here.
Tara Orban.
Here.
Jessica Ortega.
Here.
Heidi Prasad. Jose Rios. Tom Ricker, or no, Jackie Forbes, sorry.
Here.
Kane, Mayor Rockingham.
Here.
Joe Schofer.
Here.
Big Krishnamurthy.
Bill Higgins here on behalf of CDOT.
Okay. And Chris Snyder.
Present.
P.S. Siraj. Tom Misdow. Audrey Wenick.
Here.
And Rocco Zucchero.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. Moving on to agenda changes and announcements. First, for agenda changes, I don't have any agenda changes or announcements. Do we have any other announcements? No other announcements. All right, let's move on to the executive director's report and announcements. For this, we'll have today Amy Lee in her new role at CMAP. Welcome, Amy. And you are going to be giving our CMAP update today, I believe.
Yes, good morning. Amy Lee, Deputy of Transportation here at CMAP. Ironically, Erin is presenting at Tollway's Regions Changing Economy and Emerging Opportunities event. And later we'll be on a panel at Lake County Transportation Alliance's annual meeting. So on her behalf, I have a few things to report. First off is just a little bit of housekeeping, Transportation Committee logistics here. I know there's a lot of question, are we hybrid, are we in person? As you know, these meetings are subject to open meetings act. We are able to hold virtual meetings based on the governor's disaster proclamation that suspends the OMA rule requiring physical quorum. Of late, that proclamation has been extended, every 30 days. Sometimes that extension ends just a couple days ahead of our scheduled meeting, which puts us in a tricky situation about how to advertise and how to give you advance notice about whether it's in person or not. So we ask that you please just bear with us as we.
Hey, Amy.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you, but your audio, at least for me, is going in and out. Is anyone else having audio issues? Yeah. So you might want to adjust just a little bit.
Okay. Sorry.
That's okay. You don't need to apologize, but I just want to make sure everyone hears what you're saying, since what you're saying right now is really important.
Yeah, we're just asking that you please bear with us as we communicate, you know, whether or not these meetings are in person or not. We're trying to abide by the proclamation here, and so maybe as rule of thumb, when we see COVID becoming an issue, you can probably anticipate that we will still be in a virtual fashion. So please do also communicate that with your alternates if you aren't able to make it yourself. Next up, subcommittees and working groups on today's agenda. There is an item related to committees, subcommittees, and working groups that feed up to Transportation Committee and ultimately MPO Policy Committee. As charged by the MPO Policy Committee, an advisory group was formed to review the roles and responsibilities of the agency's subcommittees, task forces, and working groups. And so the memo contained in today's meeting materials reports out the thoughts offered by the advisory group along with proposed changes. Given that IIJA is now here and the tremendous funding opportunities that come along with that, there's a lot of additional work and resources required. So we are offering these outlined in that memo to lead to enhanced collaboration and decision making. Most importantly, we're hoping to make sure we're staying in a competitive position against other regions on these funding opportunities. I think I'm still having audio problems. Sorry. Maybe I have to get closer. Is that better?
It is better, yeah. Yeah, if you're close like that, we hear you well.
Okay, all right, let me lean in a little here. So, you know, that I just wanted to give you a heads up. We understand that this is going to be talked about some more. We do want to bear in mind that this is all about trying to position our region to be competitive for that funding, and we believe that we're offering a structure that'll get us there. So we look forward to hearing your feedback on that. IIJA implementer convenings, as you know, CMAP has been leading these discussions with transportation implementers like yourself to reach consensus around our regional priority projects. We appreciate everyone's time and input and hope that it will result in dividends that we collectively pursue federal funding. This is easily a case where our collective efforts will be viewed as being greater than the sum of our parts. And so we're wrapping this up. We plan to bring forward that consensus plan to you early next year. Next up, a plan of action for regional transit. This is a new acronym, PART, Plan of Action for Regional Transit. Laura Wilkinson will be presenting more on this later today. But as many of you know, CMAP is required by state legislator to develop a regional transit report by 2024. We are doing this, of course, in coordination with RTA and all of our other transit partners. We have been contacting key stakeholders to recruit them for our steering committee and working group, and we hope to kick off these meetings in January. But again, Laura will be giving us more detail on that. Safe Streets for All, also on your agenda, is a presentation. Here's, hold on to your seats, another acronym, STAR, Safe Travel for All Roadmap. This fall, in partnership with IDOT and our county partners, we submitted a major joint grant application under Safe Streets and Roads for All, a new competitive program. The grant program encourages multi-jurisdictional applications. So we worked together to create a strong coordinated application and proposed a comprehensive regional program. STAR will provide technical assistance to county partners to develop countywide safety action plans. As many of us know already, traffic deaths in our region have sharply increased over the past couple of years. If granted, these funds will hopefully lead to improved travel safety across the region. And finally, our 2023 Regional Excellence Awards. CMAP is accepting nominations for its second year of offering this program. We encourage you to submit nominations for individuals or projects that prioritize equity, strengthen the resiliency of our communities, and make them more economically competitive. Please help spread the word. CMAP recognizes that it's one thing for us to develop plans, but it's entirely another thing as to whether or not our goals are materializing. There are a lot of organizations and agencies that work hard on a day-to-day basis that move our direction in the right, that move our region in the right direction. So we really want to shine a light on their work and celebrate their achievements through this program. Information can be found on our website. Again, this is the Regional Excellence Awards. The deadline to submit nominations is Friday, December 16th. And that concludes Erin's remarks. I'll turn things back over to Jeff.
Thank you, Amy. Any questions for Amy? No. All right. Thank you. Let's go ahead and move on to approval to minutes. Before you is the meeting minutes from September 16th. Do I have a motion to approve those?
Mayor Rock.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second, Lynette Matra.
Thank you, Lynette. Are there any questions or comments? No, all right, let's go ahead and take, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's
Someone had a
okay.
comment.
This is Bill Higgins from CDOT. Just one quick question on the change from subcommittees to working groups. We were curious to what, if that will have any practical meaning in terms of the bylaws and who gets to be on each committee and who has voting rights.
Yeah, that's a great question. That item is on the agenda later in the meeting. There'll be, I think, a more detailed presentation and discussion. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and hold that question and ask that again when we get to that point, if you don't mind.
Oh, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Good question. Lindsay, go ahead and take the roll call on the minute approvals.
Okay, I hope Leah was able to get in, and I will start with Kevin Carrier.
Approved.
Lynette Ciavarella.
Approved.
Leah Mooney. We'll have her send an email if possible. Jack Cruikshank.
Yes.
Thank you. John Paul Diepla.
Yes.
Doug Ferguson.
Aye.
Jessica Hector Sue.
Aye.
Oh wait, I just need John Donovan. I didn't hear him before. Okay. Doug DeLilly.
Yes.
Heidi Lichtenberger. Christina Kopkowski.
Yes.
Eric Llewellyn.
Yes.
Chris Hebert.
Aye.
Tara Orban.
Aye.
Jessica Ortega.
Aye.
Jackie Forbes.
Aye.
Mayor Rockingham.
Aye.
Joe Schofer.
Aye.
Joe Higgins. Is that right, Joe? For CDOT.
Bill Higgins. Hi. Yes.
Bill, sorry. Chris Snyder.
Aye.
And Audrey Wennick.
Aye.
And Rocco Zucchero.
Yes.
And did anyone join after our initial roll call that wants to vote?
Heidi Prasad. Aye.
Thank you, Heidi. And that's all.
All right, thank you, Lindsay. The minutes are approved. So let's go ahead and move on to new business. Several items of new business today. The first one is the federal fiscal year 2023 to 2028 Transportation Improvement Program amendments. Russell will be giving us an overview of this. Go ahead, Russell.
Okay. Included in your packet today is a memo detailing the 109 tip changes contained in formal tip amendment 23-03. and the 108 TIP changes contained in Administrative Amendments 23-03.1 and 23-03.2. As seen in the memo, formal amendments resulted in a decrease of $64.8 million in total project costs for all prior, current, and future years. The primary reason for the decrease are two tollway projects that are getting closer to completion and will not be using all the funds that they originally programmed for these projects. Those funds were removed from these projects, which had a net decrease for the whole program. Administrative amendments added $371.8 million to the TIP in all prior, current, and future years. Primarily, this came from an increase from Metra, adding $318 million in a future year, MYB, not in the current TIP years, to the Rock Island Metra project. The net change for total cost in the TIP from all amendments resulted in $307 million being added to the TIP in prior, current, and future years. As shown at phases added to or removed from the TIP and cost changes comprised most of the formal changes, while administrative amendments were primarily cost and schedule changes. The amendments, along with the memo, were posted on November 10th for committee and public review. Approval of formal TIP amendment 23-03 is requested, and if there are any questions, I can answer them at this time.
Thank you, Russell. Let's go ahead and take a motion and a second, and then we'll ask any questions or have discussion. So do I have a motion to approve this TIP amendment?
Yep.
Orban, motion to approve.
All right, I got Jack as a motion. Tara, do you want a second?
Yes.
Yes, great. Do we have any questions for Russell? Go ahead, Audrey.
Yeah, I have a question just about one project, not necessarily for Russell. It's an administrative amendment, so it's a project that's already been built. But I just wanted to ask, a question about the widening of Lake Cook Road, which is a project overseen by Cook County. I just wanted to ask, given we are all looking at our transportation investments with this frame of safety, and this is a project, as many widening projects are, that is justified based on safety. I see it's in a location that has a hospital, parks, sports fields, residences on either side, and I wanted to understand how this project is improving pedestrian conditions and the ability for people to access on foot safely destinations, given that widenings make it harder to cross roads because they get wider. So that's part one. And part two is I wanted to understand how we're monitoring projects like this in terms of their outcomes. So our projects, this is more than a $50 million investment. Are we monitoring projects for their outcomes if they're delivering on the safety outcomes that we're expecting them to? So I wanted to see if we could, learn about that.
Okay, so those questions are much more related to what the project sponsor would be able to answer. We don't get that kind of specific information in the TIP in terms of the TIP entry and the work that's being done. That's handled through the contracts, through the letting and the scope of work and things of that in the agreement. So you said this is a Cook County project or Cook County led project. So Cook County would be the appropriate agency to provide more detail. In terms of outcomes, that's also not something that's typically in the TIP, other than we do have performance measures, but those are primarily captured outside of the TIP in terms of actual metrics. We normally don't have outcomes in terms of specific projects unless the project sponsors give us that information. So I don't know if Cook County has anything else that they would like to add on this specific project.
Sure. Yeah, I can respond with a few remarks. Yeah, so just in general, Lake Cook Road is our most heavily traveled roadway on the entire county system. It has, I want to say, like between 30 and 40,000 vehicles a day, just, in the existing condition. And so it's like really kind of a confluence of factors here, because I think that there's also very closely spaced major intersections. And so at Cook County, just as a matter of practice, we try not to widen. That's the method of last resort. But for this project, we did see it as necessary to, relieve congestion. And I know you mentioned, yeah, there's the Park District there, Audrey, but there are also a lot of traffic generators such as Walmart, Target, some major revenue generating facilities in this roadway had a lot of congestion. So it is a method of last resort for Cook County, but just because of those closely spaced intersections, we couldn't do the usual, like our first mode of trying to respond to that would be to adjust signal timings, and those kind of things just weren't possible. Now, in terms of bike ped, I know that the project did fill some gaps where there were gaps in facilities, and then adding marked crosswalks and ADA curb ramps where they didn't exist previously. The other thing that it does with the Reconstruct project is we make sure that there's enough green time. Even though there are longer crossing distances, we make sure that the minimum green time provided when someone pushes that walk button, that they're able to, cross the roadway. So I would say safety is intrinsic to, what we do when we go to widen the roadway system. In terms of evaluations, before and after, we do work very closely with the state on obtaining the safety data for our entire system, and we try to look for patterns and are very aggressively going after other funding sources to look at just that, to try and improve safety for not only just the motorists, but other users of our facilities.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good question, Audrey, Tara, and Russell. Thank you for your answers on that. Any other questions? No? All right, Lindsay, let's go ahead and take a roll call vote.
Okay, Kevin Carrier,
Aye.
Lynette Ciavarella,
Aye.
Liam Mooney, didn't get
Hi.
on. Oh, you did, great.
I did, I'm here.
Thanks.
I mean,
Jack Cruikshank,
Yes.
John Paul Deepla,
Aye.
Doug Ferguson,
Aye.
Jessica Hector Sue,
Aye.
Doug DeLilly,
Yes.
Heidi Lichtenberger, send a message in the chat if you can. Christina Kopkowski,
Yes.
Eric Llewellyn,
Yes.
Chris Hebert,
Aye.
Tara Orban,
Aye.
Jessica Ortega,
Aye.
Heidi Prasad,
Aye.
Mayor Rockingham,
Aye.
Joe Chauffeur.
Aye.
Oh, I skipped Jackie. Jackie Forbes,
Aye.
Bill Higgins,
Aye.
Chris Snyder,
Aye.
and Audrey Wennick,
Aye.
Rocco Zucchero.
Aye.
Did I miss anybody? Okay, thanks.
Okay, great, thank you. The TIP amendment is approved. All right, moving on to item 402, recommendations for transportation subcommittees and working groups. For this, I'm going to turn it over to Alex, who will share some recommendations from staff that went through an advisory group that worked on this memo. So off to you, Alex.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully my audio is working okay. I put on my big headphones to make sure.
It is, we can hear you crystal clear.
Great. So good morning, my name is Alex Ensign. I'm the Director of Strategic Alignment and Innovation at CMAP. And I was asked earlier this summer to facilitate some discussions with an advisory group to review some recommendations and proposals that and some research that staff compiled regarding a request from the MPO Policy Committee earlier this year. The Policy Committee had asked CMAP to convene an advisory group to review kind of the history and background of the project selection committees, kind of review more generally the structure of our committees, subcommittees, working groups, specifically with the an eye towards how we can most efficiently and effectively use our partners' time wisely and work collaboratively with the influx of funding from IIJA that we are currently managing through various channels. So over the course of 3 meetings, this advisory group, which consisted of quite a few members of the Transportation Committee, so I've gotten to know you all a little bit through this process, reviewed the history and background of our project selection committees. Staff put together a very detailed memo, and I learned a lot about the history of our committees through the staff research, so it was very much appreciated. And then we also reviewed a national scan of some elements of MPOs to help set some context for how CMAP functions. So we reviewed MPO funding and decision-making processes, and also some of the structures of committees and working groups that other MPOs utilize. And then we also reviewed existing committee and working group structure and bylaws, and then went through several different proposals of how we might restructure or standardize some of the committees and working groups, knowing that we have a lot of new work coming through this IIJA funding. Next slide, please. So I apologize if some of this might be too basic, but I always feel like it's great to just review what we went through and review the current committee structure for everyone's benefit. So currently we have 3 project selection subcommittees of the Transportation Committee. We also have a separate group that operates under pretty unique rules, the Tier 2 consultation team. And then we have the Transportation Committee, Regional Economy and Climate Committee at like a working committee level. The Economy and Climate Committees are quite new. And then the Climate Committee has one subcommittee by law, actually, it's the Wastewater Committee. And then we have several advisory committees, the Citizens Advisory Committee and the Council of Mayors. And then we have a joint structure for the Governing Board and the MPO Policy Committee. Next slide, please. So as part of this process, we reviewed the membership for the various project selection subcommittees, and we mostly focused on UWP, CMAC and TAP and STP. And noticed through this process that we had a lot of overlapping membership of these subcommittees, although most of the membership is not overlapping by person, but by agency. The STP subcommittee has the most recent committee that's been created, has the most thorough bylaws, and it has a very structured set of members by a joint agreement with CDOT and with the Council of Mayors and CMAP. Next slide, please. And again, I apologize if this is a little too basic of a review, but I feel like it's great for level setting, especially for facilitating a discussion. Another thing we reviewed is the committee authority and meeting cadence. One thing that was interesting is how much the UWP committee, for example, has really shifted over the years, even though it's the oldest committee that predates CMAP by quite some decades. The UWP committee generally meets 4 to 6 times a year. It's one of CMAP's oldest committee, and its main focus is on developing our UWP program on an annual basis, which consists of core project funding and also competitive funding programs. We have 2 programs that are overseen by that committee. The recommending authority the committee has is to basically approve those proposals and send them on to Transportation Committee and ultimately the MPO Policy Committee. CMAC and TAP is the more recent committee that meets more often every year. They approve the scope, schedule, and cost changes for all CMAC and TAP funded projects. And those projects are again forwarded to the Transportation Committee and ultimately to the MPO Policy Committee. STP is the newest committee, also meets 6 to 8 times per year. This one is the one that has the most detailed bylaws and has very kind of strict membership due to the joint agreement between various governments for the use of this shared fund. So this subcommittee does submit a program of projects to the MPO policy directly, and then tip changes do go to the Transportation Committee. Next slide, please. So again, as part of this process, we did a national scan of 17 MPOs around the country of various sizes, but focusing mostly on MPOs that could compare a little bit more closely to CMAP. And we reviewed the allocation of funding, including the sub-allocation of funding to other agencies, how they handle matching and other funds, their project selection process, and their committee structures. Next slide, please. There were some notable findings that did stick out that we discussed a little bit with the advisory committee with an eye towards how this might compare to CMAP's functionality. Of note, some of the other similarly sized MPOs around the country do suballocate a much larger amount of their funding to sister agencies. For example, New York MTC does suballocate 38% of its funding annually to other agencies. DVRPC, which is a bi-state MPO, also suballocates a larger amount of their funding, about 37%. CMAP suballocates 18% of its funding to other agencies, namely to Chicago, sub-regional councils, counties, and transit. And then of the 17 reviewed, 10 do not suballocate any of their funding to other agencies. In terms of matching and other funds, Illinois actually appears to be the only state that provides a 20% match for both FHWA and FTA planning funds. Found out that's actually rather unique. CMAP and HGAC are the only MPOs that rely on a single source of match for federal planning funds, which is also somewhat unique. So CMAP relies solely on the state match, and HGAC actually only relies on toll credits. Other MPOs actually use a much more diverse combination of toll credits, member dues, sales tax assessments, and other match sources. So they have kind of more diversified funding in that sense. And then, much like CMAP, most MPOs reviews also use that combination of other fund sources to supplement planning work, especially in areas other than transportation. So those include SPR, CMAC, EPA, FEMA, HUD, etc. Next slide, please. So in the project selection and committee structure realm, CMAP also stood out as a somewhat unique MPO in a few other ways. CMAP and Boston CTPS are actually the only MPOs that in that scan that have a true competitive program with solicited and scored applications for that UWP funding. Other MPOs actually solicit for projects, but they prepare a short list for staff to scope and refine. So quite a few of the other MPOs do have a very similarly UWP focused committee, but staff actually leads the development of 8 MPOs unified work programs. Then the remaining MPOs that don't have a UWP specific committee have a much broader committee that focuses specifically on finance and budget. In terms of committee structure, 8 of the 17 other MPOs do operate similarly to CMAP with that dual governing structure. Most MPOs do have a transportation or similar technical committee, so that's understandably one of the most uniform things across the board. All the MPOs do have topic-focused committees, much like CMAP, so specialized subcommittees, task forces, working groups, and they do generally report up to the transportation level committees instead of reporting directly to the board or the MPO policy committee, for example. Atlanta's MPO Transportation Committee, also notably, they meet twice monthly, which seemed like quite an ambitious schedule. And they actually split their meetings up into two different styles of meetings. So one meeting is focused on business items, such as tip change approvals, and then another is focused on more of a working session that discusses policy and strategy. So that stood out. Next slide, please. So from this series of 3 meetings, staff, through the facilitated discussion with the advisory group and through the research process, proposed some broad recommendations that we look forward to discussing today with the Transportation Committee regarding how we could improve some of the committee processes to make the work that we engage in be handled more effectively and efficiently. One of those broad recommendations that I think was generally considered favorably by the advisory group was to standardize our committee bylaws and structures a little bit more clearly. As I mentioned, STP is the most recent of these project selection subcommittees, and much like the Climate and Regional Economy Committee, it's the one that has the clearest bylaws as a result of that. So it would, I think, be in our best interest as a region to standardize our committee bylaws more, more standardize our committee bylaws across the board with all of our committees and subcommittees. Another thing that was discussed, not necessarily came to a very concrete recommendation, but just to more clearly document the membership for each committee. One thing that did arise was that with certain committees, because the membership is documented by agency, often you have alternates for alternates for alternates that might switch out and not necessarily have a kind of a proper continuity of understanding of the committee's function and workflow. Another recommendation that the advisory group did discuss was how to standardize project selection processes for each committee and working group. Some of the project selection processes are much more detailed and documented, such as STP and CMAP PAP, than, for example, the project selection process for DWP, because I think as the oldest working group or the oldest committee, it's been kind of functioning as it functions over the years without necessarily needing to revisit it and standardize those project selection processes. The last broad recommendation that the advisory group did discuss was creating a more regular reporting cadence for CMAP to share with the activities of the various bodies. And I think this was also something that was of interest to CMAP staff in order to just much more effectively communicate across the committees and subcommittees. For example, we have a coordinating committee that can fulfill some of that role, but are we using the coordinating committee most effectively to fulfill the role of, more holistically examining some of our pressing policy issues across various focus areas. So we do have at CMAP several working groups. We don't necessarily have a more kind of formalized structure for how working groups report or how staff report working group findings to various committees and to the board. Next slide, please. So I know this is of particular interest to the Transportation Committee this morning. There were also some recommendations that were discussed specific to the Transportation Committee and these project selection subcommittees. One item that was discussed that I look forward to hearing in a discussion with the Transportation Committee today was whether it might be useful to provide additional time to the Transportation Committee to discuss policy and strategy. Maybe not as often as the Atlanta MPO does. You might not want to meet twice monthly for 2 hours each meeting. But it might be worth exploring whether an additional meeting every year or maybe a longer meeting twice a year to discuss specifically policy and strategy and some of those broader issues that maybe float above the programmatic issues a little bit might be useful to the Transportation Committee. Another recommendation that was discussed by the advisory group, who didn't necessarily land on a decision through the advisory group, but it was discussed, so I look forward to discussing it with the Transportation Committee, is whether it might be useful to reclassify some of these project selection subcommittees as working groups. One reason for this could be to, for example, provide a broader membership that could be more inclusive of, say, community-based organizations or advocacy groups, because those membership structures are very strictly focused through sister agencies. Another possibility for reclassifying these as working groups would be to actually kind of elevate the public participation of the sometimes very important projects that are discussed, and sometimes very important policy issues that are discussed in these project selection subcommittees, to the Transportation Committee to have a broader discussion with a larger public body. There are, of course, pros and cons to this sort of change. One issue would be that it, in a way, might dial back the level of transparency, even while it would reduce some of the kind of administrative burden of having so many subcommittees. So that's definitely something to consider. But at the same time, it would kind of elevate the public participation opportunity to the Transportation Committee, which is a more well-known public body. The third recommendation that was discussed was creating a working group specifically to discuss and coordinate around regionally significant projects. At the moment, many of these are the very large grant opportunities available through IIJA. So at the moment, if we created this working group, it would focus specifically on coordinating those IIJA grant opportunities. It could continue, though, as a standing working group that focuses just more deeply on our regionally significant projects on a regular basis. Another staff recommendation that was discussed was how we can continue convening partners around our safety work, now that we have a new program that you'll be hearing about a little bit later, STAR, to specifically advise CMAP and help work holistically as a region to enact some of our safe and complete streets recommendations. The last recommendation that was discussed was a little bit more deeply thinking about how we could develop a regular cadence of sharing input and feedback of these regional partners and working groups to the Transportation Committee and to the MPO Policy Committee. One thing that would, I think, be helpful is having just maybe a more documented or at least more regular cadence of hearing about how working groups are advancing some of these issues. For example, if we launched an IIJA coordination working group, I think it would be of great interest to the Transportation Committee to hear regularly about that group's activities. It might also be beneficial for a member of the Transportation Committee to participate in various working groups to, again, foster that greater information flow. I think that's the end of my presentation. So I'm happy to take some general questions. I also have some discussion questions that I could. Oh, no, sorry. I did want to go ahead and put a slide up on the screen to illustrate what I was discussing with the changes between committees and working groups. One of the major changes that I mentioned that is worthy of discussion is how that affects CMAP's participation as a public body and with compliance for the Open Meetings Act. So even though working groups will have greater flexibility and, for example, could have hybrid meetings, knowing that we might lose that disaster declaration at any time, a hybrid meeting might actually foster greater participation, especially with community-based organizations and other advocates being involved in the work. But at the moment, all of our subcommittees are, public bodies. They have to be OMA compliant, so they have to follow very strict, reporting laws and agenda structures and things like that. Next slide. Thank you. So the proposed new structure that I think could be some of the focus of our discussion today is what would happen if we turn these project selection committees into working groups, with the existence of also these kind of strategic topic focused working groups in areas like ADA, safe and complete streets, freight, and TTOC, which is currently meeting as a working group and as a former committee. So now I think that's the end of my presentation. Are there any general questions before I throw out some discussion questions?
Yeah, Alex, real quick, for the, so you just mentioned T-Talk about its former committee it is meeting. For the other three, so ADA, Safe Streets, and Freight, to what extent are there currently working groups for those type things?
There is not currently a working group for freight. This is a working group that did used to be a committee. It hasn't been convened necessarily as a working group since the committee was retired during the committee restructure. One of the things we proposed in this broad set of recommendations is that it might be useful to bring that back as a working group, as specifically a working group to work closely with CMAP staff on some of the freight focus elements of the strategic direction, which is our 5-year strategic plan. And then Safe and Complete Streets is a planned working group. So there is a plan to bring together a working group in order to closely collaborate on our Safe and Complete Streets work. ADA, I believe, is not a working group yet, but that's another potential planned working group.
Okay, thank you.
In part because ADA is a very new program we've just launched.
Hi, Bill Higgins from CDOT again. Sorry I jumped the gun earlier, but to that question then, if restructuring these to working groups, I hear you on expanding to community groups and getting more transparency and public involvement in that, and that's great. But just for clarity, how would the voting and the membership work then?
Well, if the project selection subcommittees were made working groups, it would change the voting and bylaw structure. So that is definitely worthy of discussion. One thing it would do is, you know, and at the same time that it would allow for greater flexibility and participation, it would mean that those would not be voting bodies. They would not be public bodies that are compliant with the Open Meetings Act. They would be working groups that would provide a set of recommendations, which is somewhat more in line with some of these other MPOs that we researched nationally, but would mean that the Transportation Committee would then have to have a discussion about those recommendations from the working group and vote on those recommendations as the official vote that then goes to the MPO Policy Committee.
Got it, thank you.
Hi, Alex, this is Tara from Cook County. So that's what translates into more time for the Transportation Committee then?
Correct. It would require the Transportation Committee to devote more time for discussion of these recommendations from the working groups.
Okay, so the action would be recommendation versus formalizing the selection of projects, for instance. That wouldn't be done by that committee, that would be done by this body.
Correct.
With the structure that's proposed. Okay, all right. I have seen memos circulated, I've heard about it, but it finally like clicks. So thank you.
No problem.
Alex, Chris Snyder, DuPage, question. So one of the things, having been a participant for many years on the CMAC and TAP project selection committee, in addition to selecting projects, oftentimes we've had discussions of selection criteria, you know, kind of strategy and policies that have evolved over time. So where will that discussion occur when we're talking not projects, but the methodology for selecting those projects?
I do think the discussions could still happen at that level if it becomes a working group. There's no reason not to continue to have those strategy and policy discussions. But one of the perhaps disconnects that, and that might be too strong of a word, but trying to strengthen the collaboration between these different bodies could be that those strategy and policy discussions, if they're happening at the level of these project selection subcommittees but aren't being communicated up to the transportation committee, and then ultimately to the policy committee, there's not necessarily that connection between, you know, those strategies and policies being, you know, influencing other areas of transportation work. I don't know if that makes sense, or if I articulated that well, but basically, if these were turned into working groups, you would still have those strategy and policy discussions, but there would also, it would kind of force them to also be discussed at the transportation committee level in order to make sure that, for example, if there's a strategy and policy discussion that's very climate related, if it's not also coming to the transportation committee and thinking about the intersection between transportation and climate, it might not also go to the coordinating committee to be discussed with the chairs of the climate and economy committees. So it's just, we would have to be very thoughtful about how information is shared between the different bodies, but it wouldn't mean that strategy and policy discussions can't happen at the working group level. If anything, they would be more collaborative. You have the opportunity, for example, of workshopping at a hybrid meeting on a whiteboard and really kind of getting into the weeds with the policy discussions, if that's interesting.
I will say, looking at this, obviously this is, so all these groups today do kind of formalize a recommendation. They take a vote and it's a recommendation that ultimately is discussed. Probably most times approved at transportation, then obviously at policy. So we're kind of taking out that formal vote of a recommendation to transportation committee. Assuming this does move forward, sitting on this committee and looking at all these things that are now going to be decision points or discussion points, is there thought that, I know it won't go into effect until July, if I recall, but I think it would be helpful, especially if we're going to have more meetings and more topical strategy, is to do kind of a 1-year look ahead of what these groups are working on and to advise the transportation committee at a meeting, and whenever our meeting after July occurs, just to begin to prepare people that these things are coming and you should be expecting these things to be occurring over whatever is a 12-month look ahead or something, because I can see a lot of these kind of hitting, and we just make sure that the committee is preparing for and has the time to engage in those strategy discussions, those project recommendation discussions.
That's a good point, Chris.
Hey, this is Leah. I don't know if this is an appropriate moment to jump in. I feel a little like out of it here on my phone. Is it an appropriate moment to ask a question? Sorry.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Okay, thanks. I was looking at the memo, and I'm sorry if I missed this, but how will a decision be made in terms of the restructuring? Is that something that will ultimately be decided by CMAP, or is it going to the MPO? I mean, I guess MPO is CMAP, but is it ultimately going to the MPO for a decision? And or will we be asked to decide on something here after the discussion period?
Yes, I apologize if I didn't make that clear. I think I did need to mention that in my presentation. So ultimately, this would need to be voted on by the MPO policy committee to, you know, form any sort of committee restructuring. So what I had proposed is that we have a discussion in this meeting, and perhaps if there are any follow-up items that you'd like staff to research or compile any, you know, further memos you'd like us to put together, we can accomplish that task and bring that research back so that it could be discussed one more time and voted on in a December meeting of the Transportation Committee. So I thought we could split this up into 2 meetings in order to, you know, give it the weight and attention it deserves. And then ultimately in the December meeting, the Transportation Committee could vote to approve some or all of the recommendations to be passed to the MPO Policy Committee for discussion and approval in their January 2023 meeting. And then, as was just mentioned, these changes would be, if approved, they would go into effect starting at CMAP's new fiscal year, which is July of 2023.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And then would you be able to share the slides that you walked through today as well? It had some good extra information on it.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
We'll share those after the meeting.
Alex, this is Lynette from Metro. I got a quick question for you. So I'm just trying to get clear in my mind where some of the activity will take place. You know, when the committees, the CMAC committee works throughout the year, there's amendments, there's changes to the projects and whatnot. So how do you envision that working under this new structure?
Yes, it would. It would probably require that the Transportation Committee coordinate more specifically on those various calendars for the programmatic decisions. So it might require additional meeting time or meetings. It would require just much more closely coordinating with the different schedules of the of these programmatic decisions. We haven't gone into that level of detail in our research because it didn't necessarily make sense to go into that level of research if there wasn't an interest in doing this reclassification, but we could go into that level of research if that's of interest. I think it would require shifting schedules beginning in the next fiscal year.
Yeah, it just, I know that there's a lot of different approvals and kind of programmatic pieces that get taken care of down in those committees today that then just kind of bubble up to the Transportation Committee. And, you know, that's going to be another administrative piece that, as Chris was talking about, understanding what will be coming in front of the group. So the meetings definitely are going to be longer, and I anticipate that just to clear what needs to be cleared will more than likely have to be a little more frequent. So I think that's something that needs to be explored and looked at a little bit closer so that Transportation Committee understands what we're looking at from each of those individual kind of working groups, how they're going to bubble up.
Yes, absolutely. We can put together some research and propose kind of how that would change the Transportation Committee's schedule and meeting frequency and length, I would say, and put together a few different scenarios that might need to occur in order to make those approvals on the right schedule.
Yeah, Alex, because it all feeds into the projects going. Typically, all of these are federal projects that are led by the state. So, you know, how this feeds into the pipeline for project readiness for letting, I think would be a critical item.
Yes, I agree.
I had a quick question. I know somebody brought it up earlier. Did we talk about how we will decide who would be on which one? What's the thoughts there?
Well, at the moment, that's something that could be decided through further discussion. One of the benefits of a working group versus a committee is it does have a more flexible membership structure. So as one example, for the UWP committee, at the moment, the membership structure includes, you know, just these agency specific members to vote on what's effectively a pretty broad annual budget, but it might benefit from having more members of the counties. At the moment, there's only one county representative on that committee, so it might make more sense to have additional membership from the counties or have other community-based voices in the process of discussing and deciding on these budgetary proposals. So there is a flexibility there. There's also flexibility in terms of bringing subject matter experts in for particular meetings where you might be discussing projects that are very specifically affecting folks who live in a certain area or certain municipalities. There's a flexibility that's there. The membership, I think, would not be as as strictly adhered to if they became working groups. So it's definitely something to discuss. I think in my mind, they would probably, what would make sense is having the working groups have the membership that they have now as project selection subcommittees, with the addition of other subject matter experts and community voices that might make sense.
Would sorry, just off of that, would the more standardized bylaws that you mentioned earlier define how these working groups would then come to consensus on recommendations? If not a direct vote, yeah.
Yes, that is the hope. With more documentation and more processes ironed out, it would hopefully standardize a lot of those administrative pieces.
Hey, Alex, what would public involvement look like for these working groups? Would there still be agendas, minutes, and everything, or what might that? And I know that's kind of still up in the air, but do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, so with public involvement, that is a great question. With public involvement, because these would be working groups, they wouldn't be public bodies that have to be compliant with the Open Meetings Act. So there would be, agendas and meeting materials, but they wouldn't necessarily go on our Legistar website. So it wouldn't be a public meeting to have public comment. You could have more substantive public participation with community voices that are invited to the meeting. There's also an opportunity to, when you know that you need public involvement for decisions, holding public forums. There's no law against working groups holding public forums. So that's the way that you can get public involvement at a working group level. But otherwise, public involvement in terms of like meetings that are publicly posted for public comment, that would have to happen at the transportation committee level or have the convening of a public forum.
Okay, and could a member of the public show up to these, or they might not even know it's happening? Is the idea that the members would just get together, like, if I wanted to have a meeting at 1 p.m. today, I'd just email the other members, or? We don't know.
I think the meetings would still be coordinated by CMAP staff in terms of meeting times and schedules, but you are correct. They would not be publicly posted meetings for a member of the public to just show up to the meeting.
Okay, that's what I want to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
Alex, this is Chris again. I hate to just dwell on the CMAC and TAP, but because I'm most involved with that as the county representative, in addition to projects throughout the year, a lot of the effort is spent on processing amendments, cost changes, increases. We've established thresholds that we ask for. I don't know if we're still doing that. The project sponsors to be present and state their case and make their case. And what's nice, it's in a that group is been charged with kind of being that oversight of that program. If they become a working group and things get elevated to transportation, I'm just again anticipating the requirements of project sponsors to be at transportation and making those cases in that form. And do we see that would be the case?
I do think that might be the case. Yes. So there is. It's worthy of discussion whether that would put too much of an administrative burden on the transportation committee to have that level of participation.
And Doug can speak to it. It's not huge, but it is. We do see some large cost increases come through, and I guess maybe it's just how the bylaws are written. There's a lot of administrative things that are done that it would be nice to keep it at a level that our agendas don't become 14 sub-agendas for all these working groups that routinely are approved, maybe approved at the current subcommittee, as opposed to now everything elevates to transportation and our agendas get rather lengthy. And just making sure we continue to have the commitment of this group and the time and effort of willing designated volunteers, representatives.
Absolutely. That's very understandable.
Hey, Alex, if I can, this is Rocco. So I want to actually say thanks to you for really leading this discussion. I know I was part of the discussion on the committee, so thanks for allowing me to be part of that. You know, I think really what it was is trying to figure out a way to balance exactly what everybody's talking about, right? I mean, these are some of the discussions that we had. How do you balance the business and regulatory actions that we have to take as a transportation committee with the broader regional planning and collaborative efforts that we really need to be taking on more and more now that there's so much funding and opportunity that's available. So I just, you know, I thought it was really important to make sure that we collectively remain engaged with each other so we can maximize how the dollars are spent and also maximize the amount of dollars that come into this region. And, you know, and making sure that the public is involved along the way too. And Chris, I think that's what worried me too, is the amount of time that's gonna be necessary. And I'll admit it, I was the one who said maybe we need to have more meetings or longer meetings because, you know, personally, I feel bad. Sometimes, you know, we have these, and I don't like to meet just to meet, but I feel bad sometimes because we have these presentations right now. And many of us have had to, you know, we've stood up and done our presentations in front of the committee. But sometimes I feel as a committee member that we don't give the proper amount of time because you're looking at your watch or your phone to say, boy, I've got to move on somewhere else. So we don't get to have that real discussion on some pretty heady and important topics. So I think that's, you know, what I kind of saw it as, how do we really balance the business with the regional partnership and collaboration while making sure that we could conduct business publicly, but then also have discussions that allow us to move things forward so we don't miss out on these opportunities to leverage you know, what we have in our discussions. So I just want to compliment you though, Alex, on the effort and the team pulling this together. It was interesting to look back and, you know, how we got to where we are. And I thought the peer review was also very helpful too, and kind of understanding how others are set up. And I think where a lot of us are in the same kind of a boat too, where there's a lot going on. I think these new federal funds and programs, just at least we should think about how we approach it moving forward. So again, just thanks. That was my thought being on the committee with this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Rocco.
I'd also like to just second my thanks to Alex. And I think this is a good direction to be going in. Because the Transportation Committee, there are so many of us that don't participate in these other working groups, and those are really critical investment decisions are getting made. So it makes a lot more sense, I think, to have some of those conversations flowing through the Transportation Committee. So we have a group of people holistically thinking about these issues, since there's so many of them and they're so significant and interrelated.
Thank you, Audrey. I don't want to hold too much of the time in this meeting today, especially considering that people might be looking at their watches, and I know we've already taken a little bit of time for this discussion. So as I mentioned, I'm happy to return in December with some follow-up materials so that we could continue the discussion and ultimately vote on what recommendations you would like to send on to the MPO Policy Committee. I know that one of the requests was to put together some potential scenarios for how this might change the meeting time, length, cadence, schedule for the Transportation Committee in order to accommodate some of these other administrative tasks. I don't know that I heard from everyone on whether there's also maybe an interest in devoting some meeting time specifically to more policy and strategy discussions, but I think we could also incorporate some of that into the proposals in this memo. Is there any other research or any other brainstorming you'd like us to do in advance of a discussion in December?
Hey, Alex. Yeah, I know we talked about it quickly, but just the public involvement aspect, what that might look like.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Going into more detail about how public involvement would need to be structured. Absolutely.
And then Alex, I think the other question is some of the administrative pieces that are done and how that will translate into the transportation committee and what that timing is going to look like. I think that's something we need to just kind of look through.
Yes, thank you, Lynette. So we'll put this together and we'll circulate this with the agenda packet for the December meeting. And we will send out the presentation after this meeting so you have access to those slides. I can also send you the entire memo of the national MPO scan, that peer review, because it was quite interesting.
Is there a timeline to begin to draft or craft or revise, update bylaws? It seems like we're approving a committee structure and then the bylaws will come, as opposed to having those bylaws move in parallel, so that we're all making this, including memberships. Because again, I feel kind of like, well, we made the decision and now we're, got to create the bylaws to effectuate this. It seems like they could be moving, they should be moving, I think, in parallel. And I don't know if there's a timeline of December and the January policy to make these approvals, as opposed to whenever policy next meets and we can flush out not only the committee structures and working groups, but also the bylaws and the membership, and it comes forward as a package.
Yes, that's an excellent question. I think if this is ultimately approved by the Transportation Committee to move on to the MPO Policy Committee, we would put together a timeline to present to the MPO Policy Committee for revising and setting a schedule to revisit and update bylaws, which also I think is a good thing to do. But we would put together a schedule for those things and have a proposal for how the timeline would work from January to July of 2023.
Thanks, Alex, for the thorough overview and for facilitating that. Anyone else have questions for Alex or things that you'd like to see? Alex, are you also willing to meet with people between now and December to talk more about some of these ideas if they feel like they need more time to talk about it with you or with CMAP staff?
Yes, absolutely. We can make ourselves available, and I can definitely make myself available to discuss this with anyone who's interested. I'll make sure my contact information is included when we send out the presentation and the memo after this meeting.
Great. Right, so be sure to read the memo and talk to Alex if you have more questions, and get CMAP staff any requests for additional research or information before this comes back to us next month to vote. All right, thank you, Alex. Let's go ahead and move on to item 4.3, mobility recovery and ILGA plan of action for regional transit report update. For this one, we will have Laura.
Good morning. I heard Rocco say he wanted to talk about heady and important issues. So let's talk about the state of the transit system today. We can go ahead and head into the next slide. You are going to be hearing from us at every TC meeting between now and next September about this project. So settle in and get excited to talk about transit. As many of you already know, in the last session, the General Assembly passed a bill that asked CMAP, mandated that CMAP give recommendations to the General Assembly by January of next year. So not 23, 24. Recommendations about the transit system. And if you want to move to the next slide, the legislative mandate that we were given by State Rep Evedina Delgado and State Senator Ram Villavelam as the co-sponsors or the bill sponsors, was to really look at the long-term financial viability of the regional transit system. And in that space, that they wanted to make sure it was a comprehensive and coordinated system, that financial viability would also make sure that we were impacting safety, security, cleanliness, efficiency, and fostering efficient land use. So just a few things. And then to add to that, we needed to really consider all of our recommendations through the lens of racial equity, climate change, economic development, which again, all align with the conversations we've had about 2050 throughout the many years that we've been talking about what we want our system to look like.
But we also aren't starting from scratch. And so the legislation actually says that we should make sure that we're coordinating regarding the RTA strategic planning effort. So we'll talk a little bit more about that today. The things that the legislation wanted us to look at was the recovery ratio, looking at sales tax formulas, governance structures, regional fair systems, and anything else that we think that needs to be brought up in this space. So again, the mandate really is broad, and we are also working on a short timeline, so we'll talk a little bit about that. But as we mentioned, if you go to the next slide, we're not starting from scratch. This is building on prior CMAP work that we've done, which all of you have been part of in the mobility recovery efforts. We're just wrapping up the mobility recovery work and report, and that should be out by the end of this year, so in short order. And again, all of you participated in the steering committee and reviewed different recommendations. So just in that space, we had already been talking about investing in a stronger and more financially secure transit system. Again, letting people expand the ability to travel by safe and active modes, and then talking about freight and e-commerce issues. So we've already done a lot of research and a lot of conversation building and consensus building with all of you in that space of the mobility recovery work. And then next slide, again, not starting from scratch, RTA has been working diligently over the past year on their financial planning and strategic planning work, and that is also near its finalization early next year of the strategic plan. So any of the work that we're going to be doing is going to be building off this work already, and not really re-envisioning those conversations, but really starting from that and moving forward. So with our project timeline, as I started to mention in the next slide, is that with the bill passage, we have spent the last few months scoping and project planning. We did talk to the joint board and MPO about this in October, and now we are deep into all of the different pieces to get everything started and moving forward, knowing that our goal is to get this report to the CMAP board and joint MPO meeting in October. So really we need to wrap things up by, August, September in order to have all of the input that we need. Really for this team, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, is that through this time period of January through September, we'll be meeting with all of you, meeting with the other working groups, doing public engagement, and then again, developing this work. We also are not looking through the lens of we're just going to hand this report over in January 2024. So there is legislative coordination that needs to be done throughout this year as well, so that we can bring the information to the governor and the General Assembly. So a lot of work to do. The next slide, please. One of the other things that was mandated in the legislation is that we set up a steering committee structure to bring different voices to the table. It does mandate that this is civic, community leaders, business leaders, environmental leaders, labor. So it already gives us a mandate of who needs to be sitting on that steering committee. In addition, we are also looking through the lens of geographic diversity, racial diversity, subject matter expertise that needs to be at the table to have these conversations. So we are currently in process of setting up the steering committee structure. Again, those are all going to be external, because we'd like to use this committee structure to talk to all of you and our public sector partners, since we already have structures to deal with transportation decision making. So that will be separate from this body. We'll talk a little bit how those interact in a minute. We also just wanted to share that we're looking at setting up the steering committee that will be a set of people, and then each one of those steering committee members will also sit on the working group. That one of the first working group would be the system we want, which talks a little bit more about things like bus service, ADA accessibility, the land use component that is mandated for us. The second working group would be how to pay for it. So again, that's the part where we would be talking about the different sales tax, recovery ratio space, and then 3 on how to implement it. which is getting into funding structures, governance structures, again, this called out by the legislation. So this is kind of how we're approaching the steering committee. And then there will be intersections with the public sector agencies that need to be part of this. And then again, coordinating with TC and bringing the information back and forth between the steering committee and transportation committee. All right, next slide talks a little bit about that. So the way that we're approaching this, understanding that the board and the MPO policy committee are the ultimate approvers of the recommendation. So as your conduit to the MPO policy committee, again, like I said, we're going to be coming here to TC every month with updates because the things are going to be moving quickly, and there's going to be a lot of topics that we're going to need to talk about that we'll need your support and input on. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but the steering committee is going to meet about 5 times throughout this period of time between January and September. Again, we're going to come to every TC meeting. We'll also be taking this to other working committees and then also giving updates at every MPO policy, not that we have that many of them, and then our board meetings between now and September. Next slide. So roles and responsibilities, again, when we're talking about you being the conduit to the MPO policy members that you represent, again, we will be having our own staff and some consultant support in very particular specific areas on this project, not in full project management mode. That will be helping us prepare to get information to the steering committee. That steering committee recommendations information will be shared with you so that you can provide input into that information. We'll also be asking a lot of most likely information from you about different things that impact the transit system. And then again, giving input to us about the draft recommendations that again would ultimately go to the board and policy. So we do expect that TC is going to have a significant role in some of these conversations. So next slide. What does that mean? What do we need from you? So we really think it's important that this body bring technical expertise. Obviously, again, many of these issues are not new to the people that are sitting right now at this table. And many of you have been working on them for decades, but it is a new time. And so this does lend itself to looking at some of these things in a new lens. We would love to have your regional perspective. This is something that is impacting our entire region and is impacting the goals of the 2050 plan. So we really need your input in that space. Also, your partnership on this expedited timeline. We've already had lots of conversations with many of you, and getting that information, getting your input in a timely manner is going to be really helpful since we only have, again, less than a year to get this done on a very complex topic. And then we ask in this forum to really have some proactive discussions on these complex issues. In this space, we will need to be discussing some things that might be sensitive and difficult, but are really important to our region and the success of the transit system being funded beyond 2026. And again, how that impacts so many of our goals that we have aside from just mobility with climate and economic interests in our area, that this is important for all of us to be a part of. And then lastly, again, committing to the plan at the end. There'll be a lot of things that are for all of us to be doing once we come out with those recommendations. And then it will also need to be taken to the General Assembly and we hope acted upon. We'll really want all of our partners to be with us as we move that forward. And just quickly on next steps, I think is the next slide. We've already kicked off meetings with the service boards and RTA, their leadership and staff. I keep joking, we're going to set up some cots for them over at CMAP, or we're going to be doing the same over in their offices. It's definitely going to be a lot of coordination and conversation in that space. Again, as I mentioned, we're going to present to all of our working committees and other public sector stakeholders. We're finalizing the steering committee membership now, and we'll actually anticipate them launching and meeting for the first time in January. We're finalizing our consultant work any of our external assistance that we're going to be needing. And then we're, again, as I said, be coordinating significantly with the RTA and meeting quite regularly already to have conversations about what is needed in the space. The last thing I wanted to just mention is, and again, happy to take questions or any input you'd like to give right now about this process, that our project team leadership. So I am going to be dedicated to this project along with the legislative work that I'm doing. Amy Lee, so that's the next slide, sorry, is going to be playing a significant role in this. We're really pleased with her background that she's been, came over to CMAP at a perfect timing for all of this. Elizabeth Scott's the program manager, and then Daniel Como is the project manager. So anytime you have a question, any of us will be willing to have conversations, provide information, and you'll be hearing from us as we start to move through the pieces, both here at TC and then probably in between meetings to discuss a lot of the different recommendations that we anticipate. That was a lot in a short period of time, but I'm happy to answer any questions or and comments about what you'd like to see out of this process.
Thank you, Laura. We'll go ahead and take some questions from Laura. Before that, I'll just speak from the RTA side of things. We obviously are finishing our strategic plan right now, as many of you know. That is about to go out for public comment in early December, and we have a hearing on December 7th and our final movers workshop that we hope you and your staff and the many other people who've been involved in development of that process will join. As a part of that plan, we're going to set out again the fact that the transit system is going to need a lot of money in a couple of years, and that we know that we need to do some things to set ourselves up to go after more money and to change the transit system. So that plan talks a lot about that. We have an advocacy list of items. We have an action list of items that we're putting more detail around. And so in 2023, in January, about the time that CMAP is beginning their process, we're going to be taking our plans to our board for adoption. And we're really going to hit the ground running with an advocacy campaign and a bunch of other activities to continue the coalition that we've built through the strategic plan process. And we'll continue that, and we'll also look forward to CMAP doing this work to kind of work on some specific legislative proposals and some ways that the state can really be helpful to those next steps. The thing that we've said to CMAP in meetings, and we'll say here again, and they've assured us, is that we don't repeat what we've done in the strategic plan. Obviously, you all have spent a lot of time with us. We've been through a lot of these issues. We've come up with some things that we all agree that we need to take on. So our encouragement to them is to take it to the next level, take it to the next steps, and not kind of reinvent everything, but really to kind of think about how we take some strong steps forward. So that's a conversation we've been having. So anyway, with that, I'd be happy to entertain, I'm sure Laura would be happy to entertain questions from the committee about this project.
Hey, sorry, Jessica, this is Leah Mooney. I know it doesn't sound like Leah Mooney. I have a new voice right now, but can you restate what the timing is on the release of the RTA strategic plan?
Sure, December 5th. December 5th, our draft plan will be out for public comment, and it will go to, there's a public hearing on December 7th, and it will go to the RTA board for approval in February of 2023.
Okay, thank you.
Laura, for the updates to Transportation Committee, is that a one-way street? Here's what the working groups that have been established are working on, or will CMAP staff communicate anything back to those working groups that might have come out of comments at TC?
Absolutely, it's a two-way street. I think that while the steering committee is going to be helpful in getting information to us, giving expertise to us, helping us shape the recommendations. Again, ultimately, this has to be passed by the board and NPO, so your input and comments to them will also be important. Well, great. If there is any questions in between these meetings, please, again, feel free to reach out to any of us. But you'll be seeing us at every TC meeting talking about this. So look forward to talking to you in December.
Hey, Laura,
Yeah.
one more question. Are you guys thinking that we will be meeting a little bit more frequently for TC just to keep pace with this? Because you were saying meeting with TC monthly, but we don't really meet monthly. I mean, we sort of meet some months every month, but then we take
Yeah,
breaks.
I think as we move along, it would probably the cadence is thinking about with where the steering committees are and the materials that are being created, the recommendation materials and research. So if we need to, we could call everybody together, or we can share those in the interim spaces. But I anticipate you will be hearing from us monthly, if not meeting. So
Yeah.
And then probably, again, many of you
Sounds good.
in the interim time periods, we're going to need to have conversations. So it won't be probably the only way we're sharing information.
Thank you. That makes sense.
Any other questions for Laura?
Great. Well, we'll see you in December.
Right,
I'll see you in a few minutes, and then I'll see you in December.
Yeah, don't go anywhere. You've got an agenda item coming up. All right, moving on to 4.4, overview of Safe and Complete Streets program. For this, Lindsay will be giving us an update on the grant application that CMAP has worked on and the new program area. So go ahead, Lindsay.
All right, thank you, Jessica. Next slide, Doug. So most of you know me as the one who often mispronounces your names here at TC and roll call, but I have recently taken on the position of the program lead for Safe and Complete Streets. And Amy gave a great introduction to the STAR program, and I'm going to go into a little more detail. Next. So I'm going to start with a little background on some of the safety data, which you may have gotten from Vicki before, but I feel like we can't say enough what's happening right now. I'll talk a little bit about the program and about the application that we submitted for IIJA, and we can have a discussion after that. Next. So I think that we had recognized even before the beginning of the pandemic that we were seeing a traffic safety crisis. And while this is a national issue, in our area regionally, the data is much worse. And it really hits home because these are our friends, our family members, our coworkers, and we are recognizing that we need to do something about it. And with the pandemic, we did see big changes around travel demand. And despite seeing a dramatic reduction in vehicle miles traveled, we saw fatalities spike. And we believe that speeding is a contributing factor, which is a lot easier to do when the roads aren't totally congested. There's also evidence of increased risk taking. And we're driving bigger vehicles. And so when you put all these things together, it really leads to those deadly outcomes. Next. So as I mentioned, this is a trend that we've seen going up nationally. This is a slide that you may have seen before, but I added in this orange dashed line in 2014 because that is the point at which the market share of SUVs being sold first exceeded those of sedans and smaller vehicles. And as our cars get bigger and people are more distracted and taking more risks, that excessive weight and front bumper height really increase those deadly outcomes. Next. So these are the numbers for Illinois, and you can see that there's a really big increase during the pandemic. I think it went up over 32% in 2 years. Next. And regionally in the 7-county area, we're seeing the same thing. We are far from hitting our target decline in fatalities, which is, I believe, that red line. And so with our partners, we are coming together recognizing that we need to take some bold action to reverse this trend, and safety is a top priority for CMAP. Next. So like I said, nationally it's gone up a lot, but regionally it's gone way up. Next. And an increasing number of those killed are our vulnerable road vulnerable road users, people walking, rolling, riding bicycles. Next. We saw a 52% increase in fatalities of people riding bikes and walking since 2017. Next. Within disadvantaged communities, we saw that the death rate was almost 3 times higher than non-disadvantaged communities for 2021. Next. And we're finding that the numbers are higher for our residents of color. Next. Specifically Black and African American residents who make up 18% of our population and over 25% of traffic deaths. Next. We had about 700 people die in traffic crashes in 2021 in the region. Next. And this is a trend that is just continues to go up, as I had mentioned. Next. And a lot of our vehicles have new special safety features, but they primarily protect people inside of vehicles. And so we are seeing, as I already said, pedestrian and bicyclist fatalities increasing quite significantly, as well as there being more action and more people outside, especially in the pandemic. Next. So I'm just going to go a little bit deeper into this data for biped info. Next. While we did see our numbers somewhat going up prior to 2021, it really shot up in this past year with a 31% increase over 2020. Next. We're very interested in the impact that speeding and aggressive driving can be having on our crash outcomes. So we've been looking into that and researching it. Next. Some of you may have seen this image before. This is a graphic showing the likelihood of surviving a crash with a vehicle at different speeds. When you are hit by a car going 20 miles an hour, you have a 90% chance of surviving that crash. Whereas when you're hit by a car going 40 miles an hour, you have an 80% chance of dying. But unfortunately, this data is from 1995, and that does not represent the size of our much larger vehicles, much higher front bumper height. So these numbers are probably not accurate at this point, especially when you look at the data for children, elderly, and people who are lower to the ground. Next. So within our speed research, we have been looking at the rate of crashes on roads by their posted speed limit. And it's not surprising that most of our crashes are occurring on roads with the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, because that is the statutory speed limit for urban districts. And so many of our roads fall in that category. But these are still important things to pay attention to. These are the roads that are serving our businesses, districts, our homes, and our schools. Next. We are obviously very interested in the impacts on equity in our region, especially when it comes to crash outcomes, who's getting hit, where they're getting hit, and what kind of impact that would have on someone's ability to reach their daily needs. Next. As I previously mentioned, when you look at data by race, African American and Black residents are the most impacted by traffic crashes. Next. So this STAR program is a 5-year effort to improve traffic safety in the region. And we're going to focus on data analysis, policy recommendations, local collaborations, and project implementation. And our commitment to improving travel safety has really never been more urgent. So this work will build upon the last couple of years of the work that has created the safety action agendas, and we will continue with that. So next slide. CMAP is required to dedicate 2.5% of all planning funds to safe and complete streets work, and this can include things like bike ped plans, safety action plans, speed management, all these things listed here, and building out this safety program. Next. Within the STAR program, we're really going to focus on 3 approaches to improving traffic safety. We want to focus first on implementing safety action plans, and then to normalize the use of complete street standards and hopefully facilitate easier project delivery. And finally, to increase the safety and connectedness of our bicycle and pedestrian networks. Next. So one really exciting thing to come out of this is the IIJA grant that Amy had mentioned. We put together, well, the Safe Streets and Roads for All is a new competitive program that will nationally provide $1 billion annually to address this national roadway safety crisis. And this program incentivizes strategies that, as the name suggests, make the streets and roads safer for all users. So that includes approaches like deploying complete streets, safe systems approach, and working to create a positive safety culture. Next. The application that we pulled together has been done with, well, actually the program offers funding for either planning or for implementation. So we submitted an application for planning in coordination with the 6 counties, or with 6 counties around the region. We hope to bring Kendall along at some point, but for now they're not part of our application. And we, like I said, we'll be working to create these safety action plans, looking with like a regional framework at the policy recommendations and safety issues, but digging a little deeper within each county and having some local municipalities that we work even closer with and doing broad engagement across the counties. And the idea being that once we have a safety action plan for the county, we would have it designed so that it complies with all of the eligibility requirements of the grant for implementation, so that in the next round after we finish, we could apply to get the money to implement those projects. And we are requesting $4.7 million, and the counties are contributing the 20% match, and we have been going out to the county transportation committees and board meetings to approve the IGAs, and that's been happening this month, and I think we have some more in December to finalize that agreement. But we are really excited for the partnerships that we are building and this idea that we'll have an equity-centered process for engagement and hopefully get some work done so that we can implement safer streets. Next. Okay, I guess that's all. So we are just hoping that we can continue to get everyone's support and improve safety and transportation across our region. I hope you can't hear my dog barking, but he's quietly in the bathroom. And we're looking forward to this opportunity with the grant. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Lindsay. Any questions for Lindsay?
Lindsay, I don't have a question. I just want to thank CMAP staff. I know it was a kind of a heavy lift the last 2 months. Tony really worked collaboratively with the 6 counties to pull together kind of not just the application, but dealing with 6 county boards and all the intricacies of that. So we did take it through our transportation committee and board without, there was no questions, unanimously supported. So, you know, we're hopeful to bring that grant to the region and move forward with our action plans. So thank you and the rest of CMAP.
Thanks. I'll pass the message along.
Any other comments or questions? All right, thanks, Lindsay. This is really important work. We look forward to updates, and hopefully that grant application is successful.
January, we'll find out.
Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and move on to item 5, legislative updates. For this, we have Laura back to give us an update on federal and state legislative activities.
I'm back. We just wanted to note, I don't think we're going to get into too much detail of anything, as we're moving towards our next legislative session. I know that there's veto session is happening right now, but I think one of the bigger things we just needed to get past were the elections. So I think that really the update today is that we have 2 new congressional members, delegates in the northeastern Illinois area. So again, Jonathan Jackson will now be the congressional representative for the 1st district, and Delia Ramirez will be the congressional representative for the new 3rd district. As always, we reach out to our partners, and again, we have a strong relationship with all of our delegation. So we'll be reaching out to them to make sure that they know what CMAP does, what information we can provide, how we can be partnering with them on any of the federal legislation, especially now again with all of the new discretionary projects that we're working, our discretionary programs that are now after the IIJA. I'll also note that Darren LaHood touches a little bit of the CMAP area, which was Kinzinger before. So we'll also just make sure that we have contact so that they again understand if they have any information that they need from us. The other thing that we wanted to point out is that DuPage County had a referendum about electrical vehicle charging stations. So I was going to turn it over to Chris and let him tell us what that referendum was.
Yeah, I actually had to look it up to read myself. So we have a process here at the county that board members can offer referendums, and it's usually not shared with staff or reviewed or critiqued at all by staff. So there was a referendum about investing in public electric vehicle fast charging stations, and it maybe not surprisingly, it was overwhelmingly approved in DuPage. So with a new chair and many new board members, I suspect one of the initial charges, once the committee structures are established, this referendum question did come through our environmental committee chair at the time. So I suspect that this will be a topic for that particular committee, and then they'll probably bring in other entities, including transportation. So we have discussed briefly internally, but until our new board takes over and we have a chance to brief the chair or discuss with the chair their thoughts, I have begun to reach out. I think I've reached out to CMAP. I've also reached out to IDOT just to find out what other entities are doing. You know, the big push for this was the federal funding and the money coming to the states or competitively go for and begin to install the infrastructure for charging stations. So that's kind of the goal of the referendum and the ask. But obviously, I don't think I think my recommendation would be is obviously we need to be talking to our regional partners and have a regional strategy to this and incorporating the states. So more than willing to give more of an update once we've kind of met internally to see where we go. It is a topic that does keep coming up. I have one of my other duties is assigned is I purchase vehicles for the county. We have the fleet management system. So every time we purchase a vehicle, the first question is it electric? And the second question is why not? And so this is a big topic. We actually are looking at here on campus, what it would take to if we were to migrate our fleet to electric, what it would take in terms of the power here on our campus. It's huge. We would use more power to charge our vehicles overnight than we use on any given day at the campus. And so there's a lot of that discussion. Can the grid accommodate it? So it's more than just charging stations. We all know that it's a bigger conversation, but the focus of this was, charging stations locally, in DuPage County, who pays for them? How do you pay for them, right? So it's some of those things. So that's my brief overview. I'll take any questions, but I won't be able to answer them.
Hey, Chris, just want to give a shout out to hydrogen fuel cell technology. I know we're not quite there yet, but I think that's the answer for your question about the grid.
Okay. We were going wind power.
Nice.
Of course, you have to drive faster to generate the wind to power your vehicle. And
nice. While going. I like that.
I was also remiss in that I talked about the 2 federal. We also have 19 new state legislators in our area, which also be important for us to talk to. And then we also have a new town board chair. Okay. So again, those are in the new elections, the new elected officials will want to be communicating with. Sorry, I didn't mean to ignore the state and county.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Chris. Any other questions for Laura? All right, thank you, Laura. Let's go ahead and move on to other business. Is there any other business that any committee members would like to bring forward?
This is Leah Mooney, and I just wanted to say that in case you missed it, we did have a measure introduced at City Council for Chicago this week. It was at the City Council meeting, and it introduced 5 ordinances related to the establishment of a transit TIF district for the Red Line extension. And I wanted to thank everybody for supporting this effort to get this local funding source. And obviously we're not across the finish line yet, but just thank you for all the support and effort and time spent learning about the project and the different funding source options. So that's not a very eloquent way of saying it, but just wanted to give everybody a heads up, I guess.
And noted, Leah, thank you for reminding us about that. Any other business? Any committee members? No? All right, let's go ahead and move on to public comments. This is an opportunity for public comment from the audience. If you're in the audience and you'd like to make a comment, go ahead and notify staff in the chat box and they will line you up to give a comment. I believe we do have one commenter. If we could go, is that true, Doug and Lindsay?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Trying to find, it's a long list of people, unless Kim has already unmuted them.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead and take the first one. Kim, I'm going to let you call on them. And then if you could just state your name, if you're making a public comment, if you could just state your name so we know who you are, and then go ahead and share your comment, that would be helpful.
We've got David Poe, and I'm unmuting now. David, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Oh, got it. Sorry. Good morning, everybody. My name is David Poe. I'm from the Active Transportation Alliance. I want to start with a powerful quote from a recent CMAP social media post. Everyone has the right to walk or roll safely. With deadly crashes surging, state and local transportation leaders are doubling down on efforts to end traffic fatalities. In the same post, CMAP said that Illinois fatal crashes are up 32% since 2019. Lindsay, you really drove this terrifying reality home earlier. Now I want to provide a quote from earlier in this meeting by a Cook County official on the Lake Cook Road expansion project. Expansion is a last resort, but in addition to the park and hospital at this location, there are also revenue generating businesses like Walmart, and congestion is hurting them. What I'm hearing is that Cook County is prioritizing the flow of vehicles and capital over the safety of our most vulnerable travelers. Children are dying, older adults are dying, cyclists are dying. We all know that. And we're making it harder for people to walk, bike, and roll across our region. We should be investing in walking, biking, and transit, not adding more lane miles to our roadways. That will lead to more crashes, more congestion, more emissions, and more maintenance costs. At yesterday's RTA board meeting, CTA President Dorval Carter said, public transit as a whole is climate friendly. Buses put out 1.5% of transportation emissions in Chicago. Cars put out 80%. So if you really want to impact climate change, then what you should be arguing for are policies that drive more people to public transit. You need to go after the elephant in the room. How do you get people out of their cars? Well, we don't widen roadways and expand highways. I moved to Chicago last year with my partner to live car-free, but we've been shocked at how regressive our leaders are when it comes to transportation planning. More and more young people are choosing to live without a car due to the massive costs, environmental impacts, and safety implications of vehicle ownership. I don't know how many young people are in this room, probably not many, So I'm here speaking up for future generations who will inherit the climate and safety crises that are being exacerbated by public servants and stewards at Cook County, CMAP, and IDOT. We care about climate change, walking, biking, and transit. Young people are going to start leaving the state or avoiding it entirely. Colorado, Massachusetts, California, they're prioritizing human life, not expanding roadways so that people can drive more easily to Walmart. Listen to your own research. Stop building deadly infrastructure. Stop letting people die on our roads. Thank you.
David? Kemma, do we have other comments?
Yes, we've got Garland Armstrong with us today. Unmuting Garland now.
Thanks. Hi, Jessica and everybody. It's Garland from Des Moines, Iowa. How y'all doing?
Hi, Garland.
I just wanted to say what I saw on the agenda for the strategic working group for the ADA for people with disabilities. I think that sounds like a good idea when you're starting this new program. And I hope one day that you'll be able to have it in person so that people with disabilities will be able to see it firsthand, especially for those who cannot speak clear English and also need some interpreters there from their language, and then also a sign language interpreter too, because they want to see how it's going to work out and help out a whole lot in their communities so that they can be well prepared for it for the future, and also making sure that the system right there really works and they can be extremely well prepared to spread around in other disability communities in their languages so they can say, wow, CMAP Transportation Committee meeting is really catching up on it, because it's long overdue for them and they have no idea of what's going to be set up and where it's going to be at the place, the time, and the location. So I'm glad, I hope down the road you'll be able to do that for them and spread word of mouth around it to them. And also too, I want to echo what David Pope says, especially using those people are dying, especially when people are using big SUVs. That's the problem, because there are some, especially the ADA, who is individuals taking, especially those in power wheelchairs or manual or walkers, trying to cross the street and don't know those big vehicles are coming or making a right turn and have no idea that they got pedestrians with the ADA crossing the street, going their own lives like non-disabled people do. So I think one day you should be able to make sure to see how the manufacturers of SUV will come up with some ideas when they look for people who are taking a chance of crossing the street when waiting at the light or something like that, or need to do something, because that's the most important of all. Because if they build more big SUVs like that and can't even see it, then the ADA, especially individuals, will say lawsuits to the driver and the manufacturers and not seeing it right away. So they need to do something about that, and making sure down the road, God forbid, we don't want another non-disabled people or disabled individual be in a dead hit and run accident right there and dying right there on the scene. So just put that into perspective, and I hope they can work it out down the road for near future, because this is definitely a challenge for the manufacturers, so they can be well prepared and make sure that it will not happen again down the road. So that's all I have to say, Jessica. And if there's any questions or comments from the committees, I'll be glad to take any answers from them.
Thank you, Garland. Appreciate your input. Good to hear from you. Kemma, do we have other comments?
That is all we have.
Great, thank you. All right, let's go ahead and move on to item 8, next meeting. The next meeting will be on December 16th. And on to adjournment. I see no other business before the committee, so I will take a motion to adjourn.
Moved, DuPage.
Thank you, Chris.
Second, Blake.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, we can go ahead and take a voice vote for adjournment.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Thank you. We are adjourned. Have a great day and a great weekend, everyone.
Have a great weekend.
Thanksgiving, everyone.